All right, so as I said, we're in Psalm 63, and the theme is confidence in crisis. And the setting for this psalm was David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. Now, when he was in the wilderness in Judah, that's all the psalm says. It could have been two different points of his life, and we're not quite sure which one it was. But it would have either been when he was on the run from Saul, or when he was on the run from his son Absalom. And as you know, David, he never lacked in enemies in his lifetime and in his kingship. And just one of the things that's tragic, one of the things that's so sad is at one point he was hunted by his father-in-law, and later by his son. And so here you see him being hated, being hunted by some of the closest people to him. And so he's in a time of crisis. But one of the shocking things about this psalm is when he prays it, it's not just lament. There's a time and there's a place for lament. But the psalm is a psalm full of confidence. And so it shows that even when you're in a time of crisis, of real suffering, that you can have confidence in that crisis. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to go through this psalm in 3 sections. And after we go through the 3 sections of the psalm, we'll draw out 3 applications. So 3 and 3. 3 sections and 3 applications. So the section 1 is worship in the congregation. Section 1 is all about worship in the congregation. And I'll read for you now verses 1 through 4. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. Because of your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live, and your name I will lift up my hands. So he knows what it's like to be in a dry and weary land. That's the words he uses. He's literally wandering in the wilderness. And I've never been to Israel. I have been to the Middle East. I've never been to Israel, but I remember a pastor saying he went there, and they're out, and they're in this area that kind of seemed like the desert. And they asked the guide, is this the wilderness? And the guy said, oh, no, this isn't the wilderness. He's like, well, you'll see it. About an hour later, he said, now we're in the wilderness. And he said, there's nothing. It's just dry, and there's nothing. And so he's literally in a place in a dry and weary land. And here he's saying his soul is like it's in a dry and a weary land. It's thirsty. You know, I grew up in Michigan. Michigan's not a particularly dry place, being a peninsula. But the closest I guess I could have ever related to being in a dry and weary land like David was here was when I had just graduated high school. There was a few weeks I worked in the fields, just like with the migrant workers. And so I was in the fields and pulling weeds. Now, we had to wear long sleeves, you had to wear a hat, you had to wear gloves, you had to wear jeans, because these weeds we were pulling were these nasty, nasty, thorny weeds. The thorns are like this long. When I was a kid, I'm pretty sure one time I had a basketball laying in the weeds and it popped the basketball. So these are pretty nasty things. And so we had to get them, and the guy who hired us, he wants to get them from the roots, right? He didn't want us to just weed whack it or something. He wanted those roots out of there. And the thing was, it was so dry. It was in a really dry part of the summer. The ground was like packed and hard. And so anytime you pulled one of these things out, it put up like a little dust cloud, right? And as the day would go on, you'd be sweating so much, but that dust would be going on you. You'd form like mud on your jeans and on your clothes and on your face from that dust mixing with your sweat. It's very disgusting. And I'll tell you what, that was probably the thirstiest I'd ever been in my whole life. And so The guy who hired us, he'd come around in his little compact tractor, and in the bucket he'd have a 24-pack of water bottles. He'd start throwing water bottles at us. And there's one day it was particularly hot. This is like as hot as it ever gets in Michigan, maybe 2 days a year. It hit 90 degrees, all right? I know in Florida that's nothing special. But it was a hot day, and he was coming by a lot, and he was throwing in waters. And at one point he saw me, and he said, "You don't look so good." He's like, "You need to go home now. I'm not having any fainters on my property." And so that's probably the closest I've ever been. But you see David here, and he's talking about his soul. And he says, "Oh God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water." And so here he is. He's in this place, he's in this dry land. His soul is just he's on the verge of collapse. And so then we see this is the situation he's in, but we see the way he responds. And in this first whole section here, what he goes on to talk about is worship in the congregation. In verse 2, he looks back in time. He looks in the past. He remembers worshiping God in the sanctuary, and he longs for those days. He's not worshiping God in the sanctuary right now. He's in the wilderness. And he's looking back, when I was in the sanctuary, and I'd behold the glory of God, and I'd worship him. He's longing for that time. And then you see in verses 3 and 4, his hope. His hope is being able to worship God in the congregation again. So while he's out in this dry and weary land, he's being hunted. What is it that he wants? He wants to praise God with his lips. He wants to lift up his hands and bless the Lord forever. You know, he almost sounds a little bit Pentecostal, raising his hands like that. But we see that his hope is not in earthly pleasures. His hope is not in just earthly success or earthly peace. What he longs for is the worship of God in the congregation. So he's a stunning example for us that in a time of crisis, that his desire is to worship God. So move on to the second section here. The second section is all about satisfaction of the soul. So it's all about satisfaction of the soul. I'll start reading in verse 5. It says, "My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips. When I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me." There's a lot of powerful images here in these passages, and in verse 5, while he's scraping by in the wilderness, he knows that his soul will be satisfied by God. They're not eating very well in the wilderness. Like I said, we don't know exactly what time, but we see that one time where David is begging for bread because they're starving, right? They're in a bad spot. They're just scraping by. But he said his soul, it's like he's feasting upon fatty, rich foods. He's like, while in his situation in life is dry and weary, in his soul, it's like he's eating brisket barbecue. Give me that pork belly, whatever it is. He is being satisfied by the Lord. And it's reminiscent of Jesus in the wilderness. As you know, when Jesus was in the wilderness and Satan tempted him to turn these stones into bread, Jesus said to him, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And so here you see David, likewise, he's in a very bad situation in his physical circumstances, but he knows his spiritual food is coming from the Lord, and it's like his soul is feasting. And stress and anxiety could keep him from sleeping. Sleepless nights are very normal when you're in a time of a lot of stress or when you have a lot of anxiety. But we see what he did at the night. He remembered the Lord upon his bed, and he meditated on him in the watches of the night. You know, you think about David in the wilderness, when has all this stress, probably has all of this anxiety, he didn't have any TV to turn on and to fall asleep to. He didn't have any crossword puzzles from the Jerusalem Times to do until he fell asleep. He didn't have a car in the cave to tinker with, right? He just had himself and his thoughts. It was just him and his feelings and this terrible situation he is in. But here he tells us what he did. He meditated on God in the watches of the night, and he remembered him in his bed. And so it's an incredible example here that's what David decided to do, is seek the Lord in this terrible time. And what's even crazier is in verse 7, he says, "For you have been my help, in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy." That not only is he just finding comfort in the Lord and finding peace, but he can actually sing for joy. In this terrible circumstance, there's still joy to be found in the Lord. A lot of times we think that sorrow and joy are opposites, and that when joy is up, sorrow is down, or when sorrow is up, joy is down. That's how we tend to think about it. But in reality, they're not related in that way. He could be in a very difficult time, in a time of suffering, things are sad, but at the same time, he can be filled with joy. So much joy, he can sing songs of joy to the Lord. And we see in verse 8, it's a beautiful picture where it says, "My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me." And so in this picture, I think of it kind of like a father carrying the child. You have a child who scraped their knee and they're sad, and the father picks up that child and the child clings to them, right? And here, David, he says he knows it's his father who lifts him up. And since he knows that, he's clinging to him. Why cling to anything else? Why try to make it on his own when his father's the one who holds him up? So he clings to his father. His soul clings to the Lord. All right, the third section. The third section of this psalm is justice for the enemies. Justice for the enemies. Verse 9 says this, "But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped." So, David knew what it was like to be hated. David knew what it was like to be hunted. He's literally being hunted by enemies who want his life. But one thing we see, both when he was being hunted by Saul and later when he's being hunted by Absalom, is that in both cases, he did not have the heart to take justice into his own hands. At least 2 different times, he could have killed Saul. He didn't. He left it to the Lord. And then with Absalom, he didn't want him to die. He said, please don't let Absalom be killed. But when Absalom died, he wept for his son. And so there's people who hated him, but David wasn't a man of vengeance who thought, I am going to get back at them, I'll show you. No, he trusted the Lord for justice. And that goes against our very nature. A lot of times we would like to think, if I was in David's shoes, I would have done the same thing. I would have said, all right, yeah, I don't have to kill you. But we seek out justice for all kinds of petty things. We think someone wronged us or disrespected us, and we think we got to show them, right? And so we have this sense of justice, but David here showed that he trusted God for justice. He trusted that with God, all the mouths of liars would be stopped. So in our psalm today, and as observed how David went through this time of crisis with confidence, there's at least 3 applications I think we can get today. So here's my first application. It's when in crisis, worship. When in crisis, worship. Like we saw, David longed to worship in the congregation. A lot of times when we're suffering, there's all kinds of things we want. If we have financial problems, we just want a check, right? If we're going through a really hard time, we just want a break. Just let me rest a little bit. A lot of times we just want some pleasure. And this is why we can turn to food in our suffering and try to seek out pleasure. Or people will turn to the bottle, or they'll turn to drugs. And the seeking out of food and suffering is something I know very well, and I know many of us do. It's a Baptist thing, I think. But David knew what he really needed. He needed to be in the congregation and worshiping God. That's what he needed in his crisis. He needed to worship. And so sometimes when people are suffering, they pull away from the church. For whatever reason, they think life is too hard, or God isn't good, or they're too busy, or they might feel ashamed. And they feel like if they aren't happy, then why should I be in church worshiping God when I'm not happy? But worship is not just for those who feel at perfect peace. Worship is for sufferers too. And David is such a clear example of that. And so for us, when we're suffering, when we're in crisis, we should likewise long for worship in the congregation. We should treasure each time we have to worship in the congregation, each Sunday morning, each Sunday evening that we can be with God's people and worshiping Him. We should treasure those times. Because you see with David, when he lost it, he longed for it. And I know there are those who watch these videos who can't be at the service, and they tell us all the time that they wish they could be with us. So treasure the worship of God in the congregation, and when life is hard, long for the worship of the Lord. So here's the second application. When in crisis, meditate. When in crisis, meditate. So we have become escape artists. We are very good at escaping our feelings. And I'm just as guilty as anybody. We seek to distract ourselves from our pain. We run to entertainment to drown out the sorrows of life. We don't confront our fears, our worries, our stresses. We just want to forget it all for an hour or so. But we see in the Bible what we should be doing. And we see all over the scriptures, it says to cast all your anxieties on Him. You go to the Lord with your crises and with your suffering. And we saw David here, he did what the law says, to meditate on the law day and night. On his bed, he was meditating on God. And so, back in 2021, I did something that was crazy to me at the time, and I deleted almost all of my social media accounts, and I made sure I had none of it on my phone. And then now I apologize if any of you friend me on Facebook. I might only look at that a handful of times a year, so I might not have seen it. But in 2021, I got rid of all these things because I realized these are such a distraction. I'm just filling up my mind with all kinds of random stuff, and I'm not meditating on the Lord. And I'll tell you, the first month I did that, I felt like I was going insane. I thought I was a crazy person, and I never would have thought I was like addicted or something, but it felt like withdrawal. And what was happening was, all right, now I have to feel my feelings. Now my stresses and my anxieties, I can't run away from them like I was used to doing. And so then I had to go to the Lord with those things. I had to meditate on Him. But one of the greatest blessings that came out of that was in the last, which have been 4 years now, I grew a love for the Scriptures, particularly the Old Testament, that was beyond what I'd ever had before. Where when I was looking at the problems of my life, it would remind me of Ruth, or it would remind me of David, or it would remind me of Jacob. And these stories were becoming the meditation of my heart, and they were transforming my life. So rather than running away to be entertainment and social media, I was running to meditating on the Lord and His goodness in the Scriptures. And I'll tell you, in some of the hardest times of my life, there's days where it just seems like everything's bad. But in that time in the Word, I'd catch a glimpse of the incredible love of God, and it'd fill me with joy and excitement and hope. And so here's what David's doing, and this is what we need to do in crisis. We need to meditate on the Lord day and night. All right, the third application is when in crisis, trust. When in crisis, trust. Specifically, you need to trust your enemies to God's justice, not your own. Now, some of us have maybe personal enemies, people who hate you. Some of us don't have any personal enemies, but there's political and cultural enemies out in the world who hate us and hate what we believe. And there's spiritual enemies as well. And so we might not be experiencing what David was experiencing, but there are enemies in our world today. So this group I mentioned at the beginning, this campus ministry, Ratio Christi, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, we had several staffers who were right there. One guy, they all shared their perspective, and it was a very moving thing. One of the guys, he was 20 feet away, he said, from Charlie when that happened. And they talked about the students they were ministering to before, what happened at the event, all the students they were ministering to in the aftermath. And one lady, she said something that was really striking. So she was talking with some unbelievers, and her question was, is it ever justified to commit violence against people for what they say, for the words they say? And she said there was two students who she's familiar with, she'd talked to many times, and they're talking face to face, and these two young men said, absolutely. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that someone had the courage to kill Charlie Kirk. And she's standing there, and she said, that was so striking. She said, that is incredibly scary. Because if I believe the same things he believed, do you believe it'd be good for someone to kill me, right? And while, like I said, we're not in the same situation as David or that sort of thing, but there are real enemies who hate the Lord and who hate those who follow Jesus, just like Jesus promised. And sadly, I think things in our country are probably going to get worse before they get better. And we tend to see in the news will try to get us whipped into a frenzy over all of this, which is what the news is designed to do, by the way. But in light of this scary thing, we can have a young Christian man killed. We have two young college student men who say, oh, this is a good thing, and lust pursuit's a good thing, and we see how scary this world can be becoming. We need to look at David's example here, where he's literally hunted down, and he says, I'm going to trust God. I don't have to take justice in my own hands. I don't need to freak out. I just need to trust the justice of God, that the mouths of liars will be stopped, that he will do what's just by his people. And we need to remember that God is the ultimate judge, and he will make everything right in the end. And we see that most clearly with Jesus Christ. So when Jesus died on the cross, he defeated the power of sin and death. And Jesus said, when he was asked, he said, my kingdom is not of this world, but that kingdom is coming. And when that kingdom does come, there'll be perfect justice and peace and righteousness reigning on the earth. And Jesus bought that with his blood on the cross. And so for us, it's a good reminder to pray the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And so we pray, Lord, I'm not in control of our culture. I'm not in control of politics. I'm not in control of my enemies. But Lord, I pray your kingdom come. Bring your kingdom to this earth and make everything right. So while David was in crisis in the wilderness, he was so full of confidence. And David is an example for us how to have confidence in crisis too. So when you're in crisis, when you're suffering, remember to worship, to meditate, and to trust. Let's pray together.